it's an ethnocentric story written by those people for those people. And that's what the Book of Mormon is. The Book of Mormon is a story of the Nephites, written by the Nephites, for the Nephites at first, and then with the purpose of going to other people in the future. But the story that they're telling is a story of a limited area and a limited group of people.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores church history and the church's truth claims. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where Latter-day Saint explores the church's history and the church's truth claims. And I'm really excited for today's episode. I have a very special guest, Brother and Dr. Ugo Perrego. Ugo, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So Dr. Ugo Perrego, he is a DNA geneticist, and you work in population genetics. I'm going to read a little bit about your bio. You have a bachelor and a master's in health sciences from BYU and a PhD in genetics from the University of Pavia. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome. And the discussion we're going to have, the topic we're going to discuss is DNA and the Book of Mormon. And this is a topic that I would say you would be an expert in, both as a population geneticist and also probably been involved in, giving different conferences and writing different articles on the topic. So I think this will be a really interesting discussion. I've been doing a series on the Book of Mormon, and I've been looking at, some of the evidence to support the Book of Mormon, looking at some of the criticisms against the Book of Mormon. And I've had the opportunity to speak to some different scholars like, Stephen Smoot, Dan Peterson, Blake Ostler. But when it came to the topic of DNA, there was no one else I wanted to speak to but yourself about it, and to go a little bit deeper into some of the criticisms that are brought up about DNA and the Book of Mormon. But before we go into that, is there anything you want to say just briefly about your background with the church or your involvement, in scholarship and sort of like this topic of DNA and the Book of Mormon?
Well, because, I'm Italian, and I had opportunities. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've been for pretty much all my life. We met.
What part of Italy did you grow up in?
So my family was from the northern part, near Milan. I was born in Milan. That's the biggest city in the northern part of Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the 70s, our family joined the church, my young mother and father, and then I was a child at that time. And so I pretty much grew up in the church. But I grew up in a church, what we would define the mission field, so a place where the church was a huge minority, and very few members, very spread apart. And so the majority of people I would grow up with, interact with, would not be members of our faith. And so they asked for very early to pose some questions about certain things. So I've been always, from a very young age, an inquisitive person that has questions, not a person that would question things, but by nature I've been very curious about things, and
quite like inquisitive.
Inquisitive more than just doubting, and at the end there are answers to certain questions, and there are other questions that might not have an answer, or one that is readily available, or one that is black and white, and you learn to deal with that. But I did that process very early in my life, and that has to do with many different things. I have many different interests. Science, DNA is only one of them, but I just, I love to answer questions about the Book of Mormon, even questions that have to do with demographics, even questions that have to do with chronology and geography. I had these questions when I was a high school kid, when I was in seminary, and I think I just gave a hard time to a lot of people because I was pounding these questions, And of course, this is a time before internet. This is a time before much of the scholarship we have available today. was accessible, and particularly in my language. I didn't speak any English. I didn't read any English. I didn't have access to libraries with large material. Now, that was most of my youth. And then when I reached the age of going on a mission, I made that choice. In fact, I actually waited a little longer than the average. I went on a mission when I was almost 22 years of age. And for no particular reason, there were a couple reasons, but I did wait. I always kind of feel like I was a little bit on a slower biological clock compared to my peers, like I was always a little bit later. But one of the reasons is because I always kind of ponder some of those questions a little bit more, like serving a mission. It wasn't just like, at that time, I'm 19, I need to go because everybody else go. I actually, big turn off in my life is when everybody does something, I, by nature, don't want to do it unless I know why I should do it, and
that's admirable. You don't just follow the crowd or what everyone else is doing as a cultural norm or expectation, but you're really contemplating it for yourself.
Well, that could be a good thing, but also could be create some frustration around you,
Stubbornness.
But anyway, in fact, I pretty much went on a mission when people stopped asking me if I would go on a mission. But
where'd you go?
I went. That's the thing. Like, so this is how I believe. Like I believe that you are somewhat the captain of your own life. You make your decisions and your choices. But then when you allow the Lord to be part of your life, He guides and directs you where He needs you the most and where you need it the most. And I feel like that is a true pattern. I do have a strong testimony that there is a supreme being, a Father in heaven, and that there is a Savior, Jesus Christ, and that our life are strongly connected with each other, that He's aware of us, but that we have room to move, within a certain way to still accomplish certain things that we're meant to accomplish, or that we would like to accomplish, or we should accomplish. I feel like not everybody, I never felt like there is even, and this is going to tie in with the Book of Mormon beliefs. I don't believe that there is like a ABC that you need to follow in order to go from where you are to where you need to be with regard of your eternity. I think there are many different paths that can lead us to the same way. So I don't believe in some sort of like what maybe old school Latter-day Saints thought was that everybody have to be the same, format or the same Latter-day Saints. You need to go on, seminary. You need to go on a mission. You need to go to BYU. You need to get married with a member, in the temple. I think there are other paths sometimes that can just be as productive and fruitful and accomplish the purposes that you are supposed to accomplish in your life, your personal mission, as well as what God's mission has for you, or missions, in your place. And, that also goes into with the interpretation of the Book of Mormon. I don't think that everybody needs to believe the same exact things about the Book of Mormon in order for them to be considered good, faithful members of the church, or to take advantage of the spiritual insights that the Book of Mormon has to provide you. For example, where is the Book of Mormon geography? I think everybody is entitled to their opinion, rightly so. I think there are many different beautiful models and valuable points with the different theories. But at the end, I think that none of these theories is necessarily one that you should fully embrace in order for you to enjoy spiritual growth and access to the gift of the eternity the Heavenly Father has for you. And I think of sometimes people need to like chill out and cool down a little bit about, these things.
It can be quite polarizing, kind of the disagreements, because the church doesn't have an official doctrinal position other than that it took place somewhere in the Americas. And I think the main divide is between those who believe it happened in North America, the Heartlanders, those who lean, I would probably lean more towards Mesoamerica. But there can be quite the divide. And I think you can forget that, like, we all are, if you believe in the text, that's what's most important. And all the questions about geography, they're interesting, but they're not the most important things, and they shouldn't divide us.
Listen, the story teaches that when you focus too much on the text, you miss out on greater treasures. The Jews were focusing so much on the biblical text and what is supposed to mean. They frame it, they cemented the meaning of what the Lord has given them in the biblical text, to the point that they miss completely the Savior. When he
the message.
They miss him, they didn't recognize him, they miss his message. They even found that message frustrating and far off of what it was supposed to be their core religion, because they were focusing so much on the interpretation of the text. I think that it should go the other way around. You should focus so much on your relationship with God, and Jesus Christ. And once you have that established, then everything else you realize has a very marginal importance. I care less about where the Book of Mormon took place. It does not require of me a spiritual confirmation to know where the Book of Mormon took place, as much as I need to know that it is the Word of God, or the will of God, or the instructions of God, or the message of God. Theology is the science of how God interacts with humans, and recognizing God's interaction with humans is far off more important than anything else that could be given to us by scientific, geographical, paleontological evidence that we have access, and it's fun to study, but it is as fun as we make it fun and enjoyable. And it stopped being enjoyable when people start creating conflict and contention over it, thinking that is more important than your relationship with God.
It's almost like looking beyond the mark, isn't it?
It is exactly what it is, and that's why we have that. That's why we have that. Why the Book of Mormon talks about that? Looking beyond the mark, avoiding contention. Having a nice singer to the glory of God. I mean, all of those things are repeated over and over in all the scriptures, not just the Latter-day Saint scriptures, all the scriptures. And I, as a younger student, a younger researcher, I would make little things here and there more important than what they were, creating frustration in myself and in others, or almost enjoying the contention of trying to prove myself right over somebody else. With time, I realized how much valuable it is. And again, I don't consider myself better than anybody else. I consider myself blessed, and almost to the point, as of today, I hope it will continue to be that way, a spiritual survivor, because I saw so many people falling away from the path of truth, from their relationship with God, because of things like this, because they make other things more important than knowing if there is a God and what is the relationship that you have with him.
Yeah.
That's what
What you're saying kind of reminds me of a quote. I was just looking for it there by President Hinckley. It comes from a February 2004 Ensign, and he says the evidence for the truth of the Book of Mormon, for its validity in a world that is prone to demand evidence, lies not in archaeology or anthropology, though these may be helpful to some. It lies not in word research or historical analysis, though these may be confirmatory. The evidence for its truth and validity lies within the covers of the book itself. I like that quote as well. I think I
But
think
that's only a small part of it again, because there is even more to it. It is more than just the truth of the Book of Mormon. It's the truth of Christ's existence and his nature. The Book of Mormon at the end is an instrument to get to that point. We cannot stop there. You know, it is a witness of Jesus Christ. The Bible is a witness of Jesus Christ. Nature is a witness of Jesus Christ. Life is a witness of Jesus Christ. Your very existence. And
it's not so much the book, but the message of the book and who it points to.
yeah, and that's supposed to be the most important stuff. So if you don't believe the Book of Mormon to be historical, well, I guess it's okay for some people, maybe. I have a little bit hard time with that. But on the other hand, again, it's not as important as the process of the book of bringing you closer to Christ, And so is reading and studying and pondering the message of the Book of Mormon bringing me closer to Christ or not? That is the question, And we get distracted with all the little metaphysical aspects of the Book of Mormon, which sometimes we look at the book, but we miss Christ in the book. Because we're focusing so much on the geography of the Book of Mormon, or whether there is genetic evidence and where that genetic evidence should be. So, say all that. I mean, that's been my process in life. Is just I have come to learn and appreciate a lot more what the fact that there is in my personal experience a God, and that is our Father in heaven, and that there is a Savior who is Jesus Christ, and that there is a process or a journey that we are embarked on that is going to eventually continue far beyond our mortal existence. And whenever we let that go, for whatever reason, because we don't think that there is genetic evidence in the Book of Mormon, so we throw away the child with the hot water. You probably have heard that, right?
Yeah, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Aye.
Water, right? And you see how the life of people changes when they are walking away from God. It's not walking away from the church. It's not walking away from the Book of Mormon. It's walking away from God. And it seems like that happened about the same time or with or a consequence of or shortly after everything else. And that's, in my mind, is the greatest, is the saddest of the things that could happen.
Because there's some people who might leave and go to Christianity, but I think most of the time they probably go to agnostic or atheism. I'd say for most people who, say go through a faith crisis and lose their faith in the church and leave, I think that's normally probably what happens.
I'm not here to be a judge of what it becomes of them. I just see a change of attitude, a change of how they live their life, how they treat themselves, how they treat others, their light, their optimism, their way of communication. Everything shows some sort of distancing from that heavenly being, and I fear that to be the greatest of the problems or the greatest of the consequences, is that light or that connection. Now, many people have many different experiences in life. We're here to be tested, and some of these tests are pretty hard, and I can see why somebody eventually give up on God, but I know that He doesn't give up on us, and I truly believe that in the concept, to some degree, I'm a little bit more. I hope that doesn't come across the wrong way, but maybe I will adjust that after I say this one. But I'm leaning more toward like a universalism type of approach, where when he says every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is the Christ, I don't think no one is going to be forced in doing that.
Mhm.
I'm going to have a gun to our head by some heavenly messenger and say, okay, it is time
Get
that
on your knees.
you get on your knees and admit
Bow
the
that
Christ.
head.
Go say, no, I think it will come from inside of us. And at some point, when it says everyone, every knee and every tongue, it says everyone. That's 100% of the children of our Father in heaven. Um, how that is accomplished and how much merit we are going to have in that process is going to be very subjective and relative, because we see everybody in the world taking very different paths in life. We're not just talking about members of our church. I'm talking about all the children of our Father in heaven. And so I think there is a lot that we don't know. And again, why does it matter now? Because we are not trying to be dismissive, but I feel like sometimes we get too caught up on the details of scriptures, of religion, of church organization and administration, on why they say that or why they say, this thing or that thing, and we miss out on the beauty of eternity and on the journey, and everything that comes with it, and on the fact that every father is in charge, and at the end, that's gonna be what matters most.
Mm. No, I
So
get what you mean. It kind of reminds me of a talk from Elder Corbridge a few years ago, which was quite influential to me because I actually went through a faith crisis and I left church for about a year. And that was a talk that was sort of a catalyst for me. And he talked about, primary versus secondary questions. And you could view that, well, the secondary questions are of importance. It's, how important are they compared to the primary ones? And I think you could probably view the topic we're discussing today as sort of one of those secondary questions, and it's a criticism that's often leveled against the Book of Mormon, its historicity, its truth claims, because often critics will say that DNA disproves the Book of Mormon. And whenever I first learned about it, I found DNA almost like a smoking gun, because I would have grown up with a very sort of, you might say, fundamentalist view or simplistic view of the Book of Mormon, that of a hemispheric geography, and the Nephites and the Lamanites were the only inhabitants here, and they populated the whole continent. And Native Americans today descend from them. And maybe this might be a good starting point to segue into talking about DNA. I think it was in 2005 was the change in the introduction of the Book of Mormon, which wasn't on the plates, wasn't in the Book of Mormon. I believe it was written in 1981 by Bruce R. McConkie. But the church's original sort of stance or view of the Lamanites is that they were the principal ancestors of the American Indians. But then it was changed to among the principal ancestors of.
yeah, but okay, so let's stop right here for a second, okay? You touch on a few things right that are really important. Number one, more so than the Book of Mormon disproves more so than the DNA disproves the Book of Mormon. I feel like for some people, I want DNA to disprove the Book of Mormon, and rather, so it is not the DNA that disproves the Book of Mormon, it's you that want the DNA to disprove the Book of Mormon. Okay, that's what I am observing. DNA is a thing. DNA doesn't act. DNA doesn't have a capability to make its own choices. It's you that take DNA as an instrument and control what it may and may not do, and you interpret the information about it, and just like in many other situations, that we have used DNA for forensic, historical, population, and so on. When there are very few cases in where DNA is actually used as a confirmation tool to verify one thing or the other. In many other cases, it provides a scenario of things that could have happened in a time and in a place where none of us were present. to actually witness those things. You know, I teach forensic genetic genealogy for the University of New Haven, and you know, one of the things DNA is used the most is to solve criminal cases, including cold cases that have been sitting for many years. You know, but there is a number of steps, and not just DNA alone that are involved to the point of bringing somebody to justice. You know, to that thing, and even in those cases where it is a fairly black and white. Uh, conclusion that you bring in to the table, because you want to make sure that if you're condemning somebody and putting behind bars, that you are pretty much sure that that's what you're doing. There is so much evidence that needs to be brought up from many different areas and not just one area. Again, so sure, DNA, but what else there is about it? You know, what about the literary construct of the Book of Mormon, the way that it was written? Or what about the things that he talk about it? What about the theological concepts that he provides? So, you know, there are so many things, or archaeological evidence, whatever it is, so many things that need to be taken as a whole. You
into
can't
account.
out one thing and say, this is it. This is the one that is gone. You know, the talk, you know, what you mentioned, that the nail, you know, the seal the coffin, right? Well, how many nails do you need to actually seal a coffin? You know, I mean, if you want to take it from the literal point of view, does it take one nail, or before that nail, the coffin wasn't sealed, and you need that nail to make a seal, and that means that all the other nails did not seal the coffin? You know, there is a number of things that are far, in my importance, far more valuable in your study of the Book of Mormon, even from a man-made point of view, as in archaeology or the literary approach or the theological approach to the Book of Mormon. I have enjoyed very much reading some of the work of Grant Hardy, you know, understanding the Book of Mormon, or theological series produced by the Maxwell Institute, you know, the multi-volume booklets on. I don't know if you're familiar with those. I'm sure you are.
I'm ordering. I've not read his book yet, but I want to read.
It's a brief theological introductions to the Book of Mormon. These are, and the cool thing is that there are about 10 volumes of that, written each volume by a different scholar. So there are 10 different approaches to the whole thing. That's fascinating to me. You know, that reminds me of something that Elder Holland said many years ago in a radio interview at KSL in Utah, that, you know, back then in the 90s was, we haven't even scratched the surface of our study of the Book of Mormon, you know? And so you say, you know, we have a simplistic approach to it, you know, and we're missing out on all the treasures and the pearls that he has to offer. Now, next things that you mentioned something else. Oh my gosh, I have such a bad memory of things.
So
like
I talked a little about the change made to the Book of Mormon introduction. And maybe you could touch on as well, you know, the DNA of Native Americans, what we know about from their DNA markers, or like the ancestry and the population of the, you know, Native Americans.
Okay, so Stephen, listen. So the one things about the Book of Mormon, you already mentioned in the introduction that it was not in the original planes. That is not a small thing, okay? Because the Book of Mormon, at the end of the day, is or maybe if we look at the history, like what it claims to be, right? What the Book of Mormon claims to be, it claims to be an ancient record written by ancient people in the American continent, all right? Did they write that thing about the principal, or among the native, you know, the Lamanites being among the principal ancestors of Native America? No, they did not write that, okay? And Then we have the second, more recent historical aspect of the Book of Mormon, which is the translation process, how the plates were found and translated by Joseph Smith. That's the other claim to history. And did Joseph Smith write these things? No, he did not write those things, right? So anything that is come after that, it doesn't matter, because none of these other, even scholars or church leaders that came after that, were not directly involved with the production of the Book of Mormon. Everything else is subject of whatever interpretation you have. It could be scholarly interpretation, it could be spiritual interpretation, and we know that even when it comes to spiritual interpretation, is subjective to the needs of a particular person or people at that time. We have come to be very careful about, well, if a prophet say that, then it must be that and that truth only. But, a prophet was not always a prophet in all his life. He wasn't a prophet from the moment he was born. He wasn't a prophet when he was a teenager. He wasn't a prophet when he was a 70. He's a prophet when he's a prophet, and he's a prophet when he says, this is what the Lord's want, and when you have the unity of the quorum with it. So there are many things that have been said about the Book of Mormon over time that do not necessarily reflect the historicity or the historical components of the Book of Mormon development. So we need to rely on if you want to play fair game, rely on what the Book of Mormon claims are, okay, what it claims to be, not what people claims the Book of Mormon to be. Okay.
Yeah, because you could say that the church leaders, prophets and apostles had their own views and assumptions about the Book of Mormon, Book of Mormon geography, about Native Americans and who they descend from.
Absolutely. And if you only hear one person making a comment here or there, then take it as such. What is the quorum of the 12 and the prophets have been in agreement over the centuries? It is that the Book of Mormon is another witness of Jesus Christ, and it is an historical record that came from the people of ancient America. And that's it. That's pretty much where the ball stops, right there. But with regards to the introduction, the infamous introduction of 1981, doesn't matter who wrote it and why they wrote it, and if there was part of the Book of Mormon, how part of the text is, or how marginal to the text it is. It did say they were the principal ancestors. It doesn't say they were the only ancestors. Okay. So again, you want to play the game of interpretation. What does the word principal means? Means that they were the greatest percentage of the people. It doesn't mean that they were the most important one. And if they were the most important one, was that from a theological point of view, because they had the truth, and the other people didn't have the truth. They had the interaction with God. They had records, and other groups did not have them. That's why they were the principal ones. You go to the principal at school because it's the most important person at the school, right? Not because it is the greatest number in the school.
So you're saying the principal ancestors may not be referring to the largest percentage, but perhaps the most important. I think that's the way I would have read it. Growing up, assumed principal means the main ancestors.
The point is, being a principal, it means that there is somebody that is not principal. You kind of need opposition of all things. So that means already that there were others, right? Sure. Now, somebody will say, well, but that's, is emphasized. Well, but if that sentence states, that's the only way the sentence could stand, even the original sentence, is that it implies the existence of other groups that were not from the Nephite group. Okay, so the next question is, how do we know that? To what extent they interacted with these other groups, and what is the impact of this other group on the genetic, if you want to focus just on the genetics, but there is the anthropological, the cultural, the religious, development of these people over time. Were they the only ancestors? Were they the only people? Did Lehite come to an American continent that was empty and started its own civilization that went from North to South America? Or were there others? And if there were others, what was the impact of these others on that group from all the different aspects, including the genetic aspects? Can we evaluate that? Can we measure that? Do we have sufficient data to establish that relationship, that connection? The answer is not. So even if a Bruce R. McConkie, I'm not saying the Bruce R. McConkie, but a Bruce R. McConkie came out with that sentence, that sentence per se is already implying the existence of other people.
Right.
The change was a softening up of that original change. It did not replace it. It did not change it. It softened up the concept. So now instead of being principle, a group that is more important or more numerous or more impactful than another group, that's what principle means. Now it is among, so there are others, and that's one of the groups that were there. But both statements implies exactly the same thing, that there were others there. And we cannot, from a scientific point of view, determine the degree of impact that these others had on this group from a demographic and a genetic point of view.
Okay, so maybe for a wee minute, before, sort of like bracketing the Book of Mormon to the side for the moment, would you be able to explain to us about sort of like the DNA ancestry of Native Americans and what science tells us about, how long they'd, been here on the American continent, before, the Jaredites or Lehi and his family arrive to the New World?
So it depends who you're talking to, but if you would talk to Native American people, they believe to be in the Americas forever. They've always been here. They were born, they have their own traditions and their own legends that say that, in some situation, in some stories, that the earth opened and a raven or a bird came out, and that was the origin of life in the America, from which Native American, First Nation people, and other indigenous people might have come from. And scientists will look at that and scoff them and mock that and says, that's not science, that's not true. And yet you're being disrespectful to a group of people, personal feelings. You need to take in consideration those traditions as well. And, but science, generally speaking, science is based on what we can observe, right? The scientific method is that you observe something and then you draw or develop a study, a research, an experiment, based on your hypothesis of what you observe in nature, okay? So what is that I'm observing from DNA? Well, I'm looking at DNA and I see that in the populations that I am able to get DNA samples from, which is survival today, Native American that have survived the conquest of European 500 years ago, whatever is that is left from the conquest, we look at their DNA, and not all of them, just samples of DNA here and there of few people.
And there was a lot of like war and disease during the conquest, wasn't there? So you would describe that as like a population bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't random, and it wasn't marginal. It was huge. It was dreadful and devastating. Pretty much everywhere from north to South to Central America, you can see interactive maps of how the territory of the Americas had indigenous people in different places, and how those have been over time strategically decreased and removed and destroyed and integrated and mixed up. It is huge. It is. This is not this America, the America of 500 years ago, right? This is not the America of 1,000 years ago. This is not the America of 2,600 years ago. And in order to reconstruct everything that has happened here, you cannot do it with what you have available or has survived today. It has, it has changed dramatically the landscape, the genetic landscape of these people. So what you have are little pieces here and there of what you can do to estimate through statistical model or computer generated models or genetic analysis. You can infer what potentially could have been something. And that degree of confidence is based on the availability of data that you have to test and to run your experiment with. So what do you have? You have DNA of modern Native Americans, how many and whoever survived that, and however who's available to give that to you. And you have the DNA of specimens, fossils records, or skeletal remains of people that lived in the past, which again, scientifically, we are destined, like the scripture says, we were created from dust and we will return dust. Our body, every single piece of it, disintegrates and deteriorates in molecules that are no longer collectible and being able to analyze. And so the majority of people that died over the last 500 years, they're completely gone. They didn't receive proper burial or they've been preserved. So we have really, really a limited availability of everything that happened in the past. So what is population genetics? Population genetics is trying to reconstruct the dynamics and demographics of ancient people, their movements, their interactions, their wars, their struggles, the natural calamities and the impact that they had on these people, based on data that we can collect and use. In particular cases, population genetics, it is using DNA, okay? And it is the DNA that we have accessible. And there are limits with what we can do. Even if we have the DNA, more DNA available, more samples available, there are other limits based on the fact that, autosomal DNA, for example, there are different types of DNA, right?
Yeah.
Autosomal DNA is heavily diluted to the point that it disappears over a number of generations as we look at individuals. So I do not have all the DNA, all the autosomal DNA of all of my ancestors that lived over thousands of generations. I have very few of them that are represented in my current genome, right? And that's why if I have my DNA tested and my sister, my biological sister, same father and same mother DNA tested, we have different percentages of representing relationship with living relatives or percentages representing different populations. What we call it biogeographical ethnicity or biogeographical markers that are present in us. Then we have Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA. Well, those are also subjected to the fact that you need to have uninterrupted lines of father to son and mothers to children, where you need to have always daughters to propagate and pass that particular marker to the present time. So what happened to a father that doesn't have any more sons or doesn't have any children? What happened to a mother that doesn't have any daughter or doesn't have any children? What happened to
DNA is not passed on?
They're not passed on. And now, while we have so many people, yeah, that's true. You're looking today, but originally you had smaller groups of people. So changes or randomness of what would be passed on to the next generation would be more impactful in a small group than it would be in a large population as today. In the quantity, you have always the possibility that at least a few will pass certain genetic traits to the next generation. Might not be the most frequent one observed in that population, but they will be there somewhere, somehow. They will be there. But when you have a very small group of people, those markers will disappear very quickly. If I have 3 or 4 founding Y chromosome lines, right? And one of them does not have any sons. That's 1/4 of the genetic variation of the Y chromosome is gone, right there, which is different if you have 1 billion people, we don't have that, we have the Book of Mormon talks about a family coming to an America that is already populated,
right?
Of which we don't know anything about the early interactions with the local people.
And according to scientists, they would say that there's been.
I know it sounds like
Sorry, I think you cut out there. And according to scientists, that there's been people who have been here for thousands of years before Lehi and his family arrived, and that they would have been in the population size of millions. And my understanding of the DNA of Native Americans that have been tested, that it's around 99.4%, descend from Asia, and a lot of scientists believe that they, around 10,000 BC or whatever date it was, crossed the Bering Strait, from Siberia over to the Americas. Would that be correct?
Oh yeah, the ancient origin of the people of the Americas, okay, right now reflected on DNA evidence is that they share or they are related closely to the people of Asia than any other people, and that the migration process was from Asia to America. That's what DNA shows. If it's only and exclusively from the Bering Strait, that's still a matter of debate. Yes, we have evidence, archaeological evidence on both sides of the strait, both in Siberia, northern Siberia, and in Alaska, that we have animal and human remains that show that there was some sort of crossing there at some point. During the last ice age or the last glacial maximum, which was the lowering of the temperature and the rising or the exposure of more land. No, right, the land did rise, but the water withdrew, and so you had more land available. Again, something that we can estimate based on the evidence we have on either side of Siberia and Alaska. We can't really do any sort of archaeological testing at the present time on what is under the Bering Strait, on the land beneath the water today. What was there? But that plays an important role, I think, and we all agree. But it could be also yesterday, I happened to watch a video by I was just browsing some reels, and I saw this video asking, is it possible to go from India to the Americas on a straight line? And it might be hard for you to imagine what I'm talking about, but can you, like, not circumnavigating continent, can you go from India to America on a straight line? And the answer is yes, because the way we see the world today is on a the world is a globe, and we look it up, and so we think that Siberia and Alaska are close enough that that's the only path. But that's not true. North America is also very close to Russia and to Asia, along the North Pole. You can make crossing over there as well as you would do through there. But the way we'll see maps, like I got my globe right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so here it is. You got North America.
It's a geography lesson.
Yeah, here it is. You got North America right there. You see the Bering Strait.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the only way. but that's not true. There are, this is all ice. You could walk on it. You could come from North Europe or North Asia all the way to the Americas as well. Very easy. That doesn't even consider any sort of sea faring, and a ship, So when it says, can you go from India, right there, to America on a straight line? It's like, no, that's impossible. You got Saudi Arabia, you got Africa. You cannot do that with a ship, right? But the reality is you're looking at it wrong. You can go, if you would flatten out the whole thing, there is actually a straight line that would allow you to go from India to America on a boat without touching land, without never moving left or right, never avoiding it's just a straight line. That's just because of the way that we perceive distances on a globe or on a flat map, which does not reflect how things really are.
Oh, okay, got you.
Okay. So,
And I think I've read as well that some scientists and maybe some geneticists are open, with the possibility that there might have been some smaller migrations as well. Like not all Native Americans came from Asia, just from crossing the Bering Strait, but there could have been other smaller migrations as well.
So what we're looking at are two different questions. Number one, where does the DNA of modern Native Americans come from? And number two, how did these people get to the Americas? All right,
Mm-hmm.
those are two different questions. And if we have a group that arrived very early, and we're talking about 20, 30,000 years ago to the America and established themselves as the founding father or the baseline population for the Americas, and then you ask the other question, were they the only one ever here? No, it's like, no, we have now evidence that there are smaller groups that came, or, there is at least that possibility. Well, the question is, what is the impact of this smaller group to an already established population? And the reason, the only way that you can overtake that local population and make your smaller group dominant over a small or larger groups is that somehow you have a technology or some sort of advantage over that population that would allow the small group to eliminate or take over a much larger population, more so than a warfare. Like if I have a band of 30 people and I'm attacking 20 million, what is the chances that my 30 people will take over the 20 million, right?
Right.
But what if I bring a disease that I'm immune to and wipes out 99.9% of the local population, or weakens to the point that they cannot fight back or whatever? That will be an advantage. What if I have guns and the others ones have bows or spears, right? And which one will be the better technology? So what I'm talking about is that we had a similar situation when Homo sapiens came into Europe from Africa and they encountered Neanderthals. Neanderthals were already an established population in Europe. How come they became extinct and the Homo sapiens took over? And people think, that could be because of technological or even societal or cultural advantages, maybe better way to communicate or better way to work in groups than the Neanderthals had. So anyway, there are many things that determine why a small group may or may not be able to dominate or make a huge impact in a hosting population. And as far as we know, with the smaller groups that came later, they had a very limited impact, to the point that either they established themselves locally in a particular area that was not populated, like, we have some northern North America populations that maybe came from Asia across the North Pole, and they just established themselves in what it is modern northern Canada and didn't make it through because there were already other people, so the expansion was not possible, or they simply disappear, or they were simply assimilated with the local population.
Okay. I think that's some good background. So if we come back to the Book of Mormon, so critics will often say that DNA disproves the Book of Mormon, and maybe if you read the Book of Mormon simplistically, like I said at the beginning, my assumption growing up, and I think it was a lot of members of the church and leaders would have believed that the Native Americans principally descend from the Lamanites and they're of Israelite origin, and the assumption of land northward, land southward, narrow neck of land, it's the entire continent of North and South America. And then they would say, well, 99% of DNA points to Asia, not from Israel. That disproves the Book of Mormon. My understanding of doing the research into DNA is like that would definitely disprove that assumption. Why doesn't that disprove it for you? And maybe we could get into geography size and then also a small group intermixing with millions of people here.
Well, so number one, we're talking about events, particularly the one that has to do with this particular group, the Lehite group, that took place about 600 BC. All right. Now, this already eliminate what we know as to be the Jaredites, which when we talk about these things, everybody dismiss them. Okay, the Jaredites are like the little pebble in your shoe that you don't want to have in there because the cost is comfort. But there are so many questions about them that we should answer, but we don't want to answer because we cannot answer those questions. So we're eliminating a big player in the whole picture of the Book of Mormon, okay?
Because they arrived first around, was it 2000 BC, and they traveled through Asia as well before they build the barges to travel across.
But we don't just say any of that. These are our conclusion, our interpretation, all right? The Jaredites don't tell us which ethnic group they belong to, all right? Therefore, which DNA they should have carried to the Americas. And they don't tell us exactly which path they follow. We don't have a map that they have left. We just know about Highland Open, and maybe a different route that they follow, but they are all assumption. We have absolutely nothing in the record that tell us about that. We only know that they exist, right? We only can assume the amount of time that the time when they came, and then we make a lot of assumptions like, oh well, they became completely extinct. Well, that's not true. One of them was in Zarahemla, was found by the people that later were found by Mosiah. They live into in what we refer to as the Mulekites or so on. But there are so many intriguing things. Like if the Jaredites existed and they were a real people, the chances that they became completely extinct is zero, okay, because of warfare. You don't have a war where only two people survive and then one kill the other. It just doesn't happen that way, okay?
Right.
So again, how big was that group? How long have they been there? How much they multiply? Where did they go? Where did they land? Where did they live? Where did they come from? What DNA did they bring to it? We don't know any of those questions, and therefore we dismiss them. It's like if they never existed, all right? And that's already an interesting part of how we are making our conclusion on the Book of Mormon genetics. We are tending to dismiss things that we cannot provide answers to, so that our story looks better and is stronger and makes a better case of it. All right? Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay. Mm-hmm. That's only what the Book of Mormon tells us. Again, we mentioned that there were probably other groups and other ways that we don't even know anything about it. But going back to your question, when Lehi arrived, we know that they kept a record. At least, again, I'm referring to what the Book of Mormon says. You can believe or not in that text, but that's what the Book of Mormon says. They kept a record. And when Joseph Smith translated that record, we know from church history, again, assuming that that is what really happened, that 116 pages were lost. So the 116 pages contains the first 450 years of history in the Americas. Okay, what we refer to as the records of Nephi or the small plates tell us absolutely nothing about those 450 years. Okay,
it was more of a secular history, is my understanding, that account.
You have to think, to do better critical thinking than that, Stephen. You need to, to think about it. What is that we are reading in the small plates versus how many years we are talking about? All right. So what do they have in common? Some people in the church teaches that the small plates replace the 116 plates, the pages that were lost. And that is not correct. Okay. The small plates tell us that the people left Jerusalem. Then there are some teachings, some spiritual teachings in it. All right. And then they end with King Benjamin. All right.
Right.
So the starting point and the ending point probably overlapped with the large plates, the 116 pages that were lost. But the one in between is completely missing. There are 450 years missing. The only thing that the small plates tell us is in 2 Nephi chapter 5, where we are told that they arrived to the Americas and they divide as two groups. Nephi takes the people that want to support him and they leave, and the Lamanites are left behind. That is the only thing that we know of on the history of 450 years. Now, would we know more about the demographics and the interaction with local people if we would have the 116 pages? Maybe, right? Why maybe? Well, because those 116 pages, again, are the results of a summary that Mormon made of the records, right? That means that Mormon made a cognitive decision, what's the word? A reason. It was inspired. Some was his choice, some was God's choice, whatever there is, to take from the full story of the Nephite only certain parts and put them as an abridgment, as a summary in the large plates. And then we lost that. So there was a full story, a summary of the story, and no story. And that's what we're dealing with, no story. All right. And those are the first 450 years, which indicated what happened to the people when they arrived to the Americas and the interaction with potential local indigenous population, all the way up to just 100 years before Christ's birth.
Yeah, because in Mosiah it starts with King Benjamin, but Mosiah having gone from Nephi to Zarahemla, and I don't believe it explains all the particulars of how they got there.
But that's 450 years, Stephen. Think about Americas or think about Europe. What changed over the last 450 years in the populations of Europe or America?
Yeah, there's been a lot.
It's been a lot of change. The 450 years is a tremendous amount of time. That anything and everything could have happened, and we have absolutely no story of what happened and to what degree. So you can see that a lot of what we're doing is an assumption of how our small group of people eventually became part of whatever population we have at the time of King Benjamin, which is about 150 years before Christ's birth. How did we get to that point? We have no idea. Who are these people? Well, that is clear to them, but it's not clear to us. Here and there, they say things like, I'm a direct descendant or a real descendant of so-and-so, I'm a true Nephite, They say these things, but they mean nothing to us because we don't understand what is that happened before that led to that point that make them to do the statements. We don't know. We have you ever seen those maps? You're a European, I'm a European. Have you ever seen those maps that show the ethnocentricity of America, of United States people?
Maybe.
Those are fun. They're fun maps, they kind of meant at the end to make fun of a little bit of how American thinks, there is United States and then the rest of the world, and they don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Like
they're not aware of the history or much of the geography of the rest of the world.
Yeah, and so there is like this really funny, I think they're hilarious from my point of view, map that world map or globes that are designed based on the concept of how many Americans think there is of outside of the United States. But that's very typical. Many cultures and population have when we have their histories are very ethnocentric. When I grew up, we study world history or the history of the world from basically an Italian perspective. We emphasize things, we've probably spent just as much time as studying Italian history as we did to study the rest of the world history. We didn't focus on the details of what happened in Ireland in the 13th century. We care less about that. Even if the information is available, we don't study that. We have no idea. I just barely know where Ireland is, and then maybe there was some war between the Catholics and the Protestants. And that's because we listen to U2 songs, But
and the point you're trying to make is that the Nephites and their record, that they would have been very much focused on themselves, or like a lineage history, and it wouldn't go into a lot of details about the other people, almost that they're a bit self-absorbed. You could almost view it that way a little bit.
Well, also because information wasn't available to them, and also because it wasn't relevant to them. And so we take that ethnocentric history of what is happening to them, and we blow out of proportion, and we think that is the history of all the Americans, of all the indigenous population. No, it's not. It's the history of whoever has the record and is able to write on those records, and how far they can go to get that information. There are times in the Book of Mormon, and again, that's a summary, it's not the full story, where we don't even hear about the Lamanites for a long time. We hear about the interaction of what's going on with the Nephites because they are they're record keepers. The Lamanites come into play and mention only when either they're coming to attack and they show up at the front door, or when the Nephites trying to go and live or minister among the Lamanites, like Ammon and his son, or Zaniph that wants to go back and inherit the land of his forefather and goes to the land of Nephi and Lehi and live with the Lamanites for a period of time. That's the story of Zaniph, Noah, and Limhi in the book of Mosiah. Those are the only things you hear about the Lamanites, and so how much you expect to hear about other population? That's one thing. The other thing is that is the genetic admixture with local population the same as or the impact the same? Does it travel along the same line as the cultural religious impacts of a population? The book is not keeping records of who is marrying who and how many children they have and how much of their DNA is passed on to the next generation. The book is about the teaching that are transmitted to people that did not have those teachings. It's a missionary record. I know about God. You don't know about God. I'm going to teach you about God. You may accept it and become part of my people. You may reject it and fight me, so you are my enemy, and we are divided. All right, that's basically where the line stops. It doesn't say anything about, well, wait a second, you're not from my same tribe, so I'm not going to marry you and I'm not going to have any kids with you. As long as you believe what I believe, you're part of my people. That's what it is. And so
my understanding as well, from reading the Book of Mormon, is we kind of assume that like Nephite and Lamanite refers to the blood descendants of Nephi and his kin, and Laman and Lamiel, but Nephite is sort of more of a cultural designation to those who are like friendly or with the Nephites, and Lamanites is sort of like all those who aren't a Nephite, especially
exactly
towards the end of the book.
And it starts right at the beginning too. I mean, Nephi says that in chapter 5 of Second Nephi, whoever believes in God, whoever supports me, is gonna be my people. And who does not support me is gonna be part of the other people. It's a belief matter at that point already. They're all brothers and sisters, but it's about who believes is gonna call this way and who doesn't believe. And people say, well, but that was a small family. Yeah, but how do you distinguish? If you and I are physical brothers and we have the same mom and the same dad, and it's Lehi and Saraya is your mom and your dad, and they are my mom and my dad, and we have, how is dividing each other gonna create two genetic groups? It's not.
No.
We're gonna be two ideologically different groups with the same DNA. All right. Now Nephi in chapter 5 lists everyone that comes with him. Okay, it talks about Sam, it talks about Laban, it talks about different people that comes with him. All right, not Laban, sorry. Laban.
Sam, Zoram.
Zoram, not Laban, sorry, Zoram. The little Zoram, and so it lists each one of them, and then it says this sentence. It says, and everyone else that would follow me. Now, it pretty much exhausts the list of people. Like he mentioned by name, everybody we are familiar with from the Book of Mormon narrative. Those are the people that were on the ship with him, all right? Their wife, their kids, he mentions all of them. And then at the end it says, and everyone else that would follow me. Who are these everyone else? And in the history of the gospel, we always been a missionary-oriented people. We have not looked at ethnicity as a matter of, when there was truth, okay, on the earth. When there was truth on the earth, we always shared that truth with everybody else. Adam did that. Noah did that. Enoch did that. Moses did that, okay? Even Jews accept conversion to their faith if you accept to do the things that they're required to do. It is not a biological thing to be a Jew. It is a belief thing. It's what you series of rites and ordinances and beliefs. And so wherever there was a truth, there always was a missionary work. And where is there missionary work? You baptize anyone that would believe in the gospel, regardless of race or ethnicity. And that would have happened in the Americas, just as it happened in any other times of history as described in the scriptures. Okay, we always did that. Even in the early years of the church, members of African descent, they were baptized in the church. Okay, and then there were other issues that came into place afterward, but the gospel has always been open to everybody. So there is absolutely no reason to believe that the Nephites kept to themselves as a single ethnic group that grow into millions and kept that purity in their genes. There is absolutely no evidence or no reason to support that, based on how history.
Right, because I know a lot of critics would say that the Book of Mormon, I think you're talking about this, the reference by and all others that would follow Nephi, leaving room that there are maybe other peoples here. Critics would often say that the Book of Mormon doesn't speak at least explicitly about other peoples living here. The assumption we've had they came to an empty continent, and I believe that there's a quote from Simon Southerton, who's a common critic, and he would agree with sort of the faithful view that if a small group of Lehites came to the Americas and they're already millions of people here, then it wouldn't be a surprise that we wouldn't see their DNA DNA markers after a few generations. And I think that the debate comes into, does the Book of Mormon speak of other peoples here? Does it allow for that? Because they're trying to make the argument that that's not what the Book of Mormon says, or that's not what the prophets and apostles have believed. And I think
That's absolutely not true. First of all, there have been many apostles and prophets and leaders and scholars that have went both ways. Number one, there again, it's always a pick and choose. Okay, I like this quote, I'm gonna use that one. Oh, well, that one I don't like it because it doesn't fit my model, so I'm gonna dismiss that. All right, we have plenty of individuals that said anything about how many people were here or if there were any people at all. We had what
I remember reading a quote by, I think it was John Dwetnes, I think was his name. I think he was in the first presidency, if I'm not getting his name incorrect.
John Evans was a scholar of farms.
Okay, I may be getting the name wrong. I did have the quote.
Irwin was one of them. George Irwin.
Yes, it was one of. I know it was someone in the first presidency, and he said that we should be careful saying that the Lamanites and the Nephites were the only people living here. We don't know about other people here. So I think you're right that it's not been that all prophets and apostles have necessarily taught that. Maybe others like B.H. Roberts might have been more careful when it came to that.
B.H. Roberts, one of the faith crisis moment in B.H. Roberts' life was when he was not being able to reconcile a specific question that was asked of him. He was some sort of like the go-to person to answer all the difficult questions about the gospel and the restoration and the Book of Mormon. And he went, the story goes that he received a letter where someone was asking him, how do you explain the huge language diversity, the linguistic diversity found in the Americas, which is something that would have to develop over, thousands and thousands of years, and not being able to come from just one language, which would have been Hebrew or Aramaic or a Middle Eastern language that the Nephite would have been speaking, when they came to America, because he assumed that the hemispheric model that there was only Nephites and Lehites in all America. There was absolutely no one else. And he couldn't reconcile that question. He couldn't find an answer to the question that poses a problem. But again, that's because he assumed something based on what his understanding or reading of the Book of Mormon was. Well, no one has ever made a claim, not even the Book of Mormon, that there was no other people here. They don't explicitly say that, and they don't explicitly say that there were other people. It is something left in limbo. There are some references in the Book of Mormon that can make you think so, that there were other people, but they are not open statements that clearly makes that conclusion. Okay,
yeah, it's kind of like implicit reading between the lines. I think I checked who. I think it was President Ivins. I think I got the name wrong.
Yeah, Ivins. Yeah,
that was the quote.
And so the point is, number one, historically and scientifically, we know there were other people here. Okay, so does the text of the Book of Mormon explicitly goes against the historical evidence that there were other people here? Does the Book of Mormon openly states that there were no other people, while scientifically we know there were other people? That's the first question we need to answer. And the answer to that question is no. The Book of Mormon does not dismiss that possibility. So it does not make open, clear mention of that, but it also does not make a statement that there were none others here, that there were the first and the only people here. So that's important. Just the fact that because we are not saying something doesn't mean that that didn't happen, all right? Number two, are there any references or any hint in the text of the Book of Mormon that might lead us to think that, yes, there are knowledge in the presence of other people and they were actually interacting with them? And I can tell you that there are plenty of such evidences in the Book of Mormon, such evidence in the Book of Mormon. that will that support that there were other people. It's just you need to change your glasses and wear different glasses and start reading the Book of Mormon, thinking, I know there were other people, and these people in the Book of Mormon know there are other people. Now let's read the text and see if I can see that myself, all right? Rather than just...
And what would be a few implicit references that you would see in the text, maybe certain verses or parts where you would see implicit references to other people?
Number one, chapter 5 of Second Nephi, where Nephi exhausts the list of people that we are familiar with from Mormon's narrative, from the Book of Mormon narratives. We're familiar with his names, and then once he listed them all, then he added this and everyone else. I'm like, who's left at that point that would follow him, right? Number one. Number two, the disproportional growth between Nephites and Lamanites in numbers that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Lamanites seems always to be about 2/3 the size of the Nephites, and yet they're given the same procreative potential, to grow.
They're both roughly the same size when they split, aren't they? The Lamanite party and the Nephite party. But yes, their population grows exponentially bigger.
Yeah, it seems like to see that there are always more for some reason, and again, this is my interpretation, but it's a lot easier to follow the word than to follow God. All right, and so I would feel like what we're talking about here, growth, is just again a cultural things where assimilation of non-believers is grow bigger than assimilation of believers. You see that with missionary work nowadays. You always see that. Yes, there is some growth in the church, but look at the people in the world that decide not to listen to the message of the restoration. And not just in our time, all the times. And we know that the Book of Mormon says that, the natural man is an enemy to God, which means naturally you would have more people not listen to or the enticing of looking for the spirit or the message than to follow Christ. So I think the growth is not biological, but it is an assimilation growth. Okay. Then you have Jacob chapter 7 that talks about Sherem, the Antichrist, and he is familiar with the language of the people, and he's an outsider. And it talks to Jacob saying, "Oh, I've tried to meet with you for a long time. I finally got to meet you. But that's Jacob. That's first generation Nephites. How long does it take for two people to meet in person and have a conversation, right? Why do you need to mention that this guy is familiar with the way of talking of your people?
Showing he spoke a different language.
Yeah, I mean, where does he come from? Who is this guy? Early in the book of in the book of Jacob, where the Nephites are taking a bunch of concubines, right? More wives and concubines, and Jacob is not happy with it, and he says, if God commanded, it's okay, but it wasn't commanded to you. Well, there are a couple of things there. Number one, where are they finding all these extra wives, these additional wives, right? I mean, is this like some sort of family reunion that you go to pick up chicks, what was the and then why they use concubines as a word, which in Old Testament times a concubine was someone that was not from your family or ethnic group,
like a foreign woman,
a foreign woman, right? And so, I mean, those are just few examples, then as you move forward, it seems to me like there was the biggest, I mean, this is the early years, number one, these are the early years. But
and actually piggybacking onto that, I remember doing an interview with Brent Gardner and reading in his book, and in that same chapter about wives and concubines, he talked about how Jacob is sort of rebuking the Nephites for costly apparel and being puffed up in pride. And he talked about costly apparel, having like fancier things compared to other people, that comes from trade, trading with other peoples there, and that's another implicit reference. And he's obviously from Mesoamerica's the most likely candidate. He talked about how in that time in Mesoamerica that some of the Mayan peoples would have had larger families, like wives and concubines, so they could have produced more, so they could have traded more, and it was almost part of like having a mini factory, and how those two things sort of go together and imply that there's other people that they have to be trading with, which is something that you probably wouldn't have gotten just from reading it simplistically, but sort of reading between the lines.
And the Book of Mormon is very consistent in this, because we mentioned earlier that Nephi says, I'm not going to repeat the history in these plates. I'm going to write some spiritual lessons. And there is a spiritual treaty. The first and second Nephi's are filled with sermons. We have Isaiah books. We have witnesses of Christ. We have, there is very little historical, and it says that, okay? And that's all we have actually to learn about the history, is a book that explicitly was stated not to be historical, okay? Mm-hmm. That's what we drive in all our history, including the interaction, the demographics with people. Nephi is not focused on that when he writes those small plates. Where is the story? Well, the story would have been in the larger plates that we are not having. So again, remember, and I think people are not catching the importance of that. We had the full history of the Nephites, okay? The historical records. That is not what we have in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon states to be a summary of those records, right? When Nephi says, I am writing the spiritual stories on these plates, and the large plates have the full story, is not talking about the rest of the Book of Mormon. It's talking about the plates that Mormon used to write the Book of Mormon.
Right, yeah, his own abridgment from the large plates.
We forget to think about that, all right? The Book of Mormon is not the full story, and it is a summary, is an abridgment that is incomplete, because we're missing everything between 600 BC to 150 BC. We're missing 450 years of history that was of a summary history, of an abridgment history that was on the 116 pages. Those are the pages where we would have read about others in the Book of Mormon. Either the 116 pages or the full records. We don't have access to neither of those sets. All we have are few chapters that have explicitly been stated by Nephi to be a spiritual history.
It kind of reminds me whenever I had both a journal and then more of a spiritual journal, and you can always compare that to what Nephi was doing in a sense.
It's worse than that. I feel like it is like if you are looking in a recipe book for information about the stock market. Okay, this is what I'm thinking about. Nephi say, look, I'm not going to put any of these things in here. And what do? You go there and looking for exactly the things that he says he wasn't going to put in there.
Yeah, it's like a different purpose.
Yeah, it's a different purpose, different content. And so the Book of Mormon is consistent with that. We are not consistent with the interpretation and the expectation we have from the Book of Mormon. We are missing 450 years of abridged history. And I want to emphasize abridged history, because we have no idea what Mormon put in there. Now, and Joseph Smith, again, if he's not making this story up and it's all real, Joseph Smith would have read those, and Martin Harris would have read those, right? Maybe they make mentions of things in their sermons and writing, because they would have read those pages before they were lost. They translated them. But we know there is information in there that we don't know. Like we know something about the lineage of Ishmael and of Lehi in there that is not found in the Book of Mormon. That would have been in the 116 pages. But the reality is Mormon made a summary, and that summary was lost. And we are expecting to know some information. We're asking questions that we don't have a source for. And because we don't have a source for, then we think that didn't exist.
Right. Okay. A common scripture critics would point to sort of pushing back on there being other, populations here. And I'm paraphrasing, so you might know the scripture better than me, but it's in Second Nephi chapter 1, talking about, brought to a land kept from the knowledge of other nations. And critics might say that, does this verse not show that, other nations, there weren't other peoples here? What would be your quick response to that? I think I'm kind of remembering the verse. I can get it up if you want me to read what the verse actually says.
No, I know what you're talking about, but this is the deal, right? I am from Italy. I came to America, and my family, my parents, my siblings, my grandma are left back in Italy. All right. Now they go on the internet, they watch the news, and they learn about things like, let's say, a fire in California. Okay. There is a big fire in California. Houses are burning down. People are evacuated, right? And I live in Illinois. Well, my parents will write to me and say, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm in Illinois. I'm not in California, all right? I'm not impacted by that, right?" So my mother does not have a knowledge of what's going on in this land as much as I do living in this land. Okay. And that's with today's technology, they allowed us to access some information about what's going on to the Americas. So unless it's me that communicates to her and say, look, this is what's going on in the United States today, and this is how that is impacting my life, she has no clue unless I do that, right? So what does it mean to keep from the knowledge of the people? It means that you can have 1, 2, 10, 50 groups of people coming to America. But as long as they arrive here and they're no longer communicated with the original group from where they're coming from, that original group is kept from the knowledge of this land.
Oh, okay.
Let me explain to you just using the Nephite and the Leah. So Nephi family comes to the America. Do they ever go back to Jerusalem to tell them, we made it safely to this promised land? We found a land that no one knew. We have established us here. We're all doing fine. Don't worry about us. I'm leaving again and I'm going back to America. Did they do that?
I hope not, after all the time it took them to get there. No.
They didn't. And so their knowledge was lost to the knowledge of the people. I'm sure they had friends. I'm sure they had relatives that didn't come with them. And to them, to those people, they were dead. They were gone. They were no longer existing because they have no idea where they went and how they were doing and if they were still alive. Okay? And so the fact that the land is kept as a knowledge from other people, it doesn't prevent groups of people to arrive to the America because they are not returning that information to their original groups from where they came from.
Okay, gotcha. And talking about the geography of the Book of Mormon, you say, you don't care where it happened, but I believe that you would probably agree that it's more of a limited geography if it's
Absolutely.
historical. And before the DNA testing was done of Native American, scholars were looking at the distances traveled and realized this couldn't be hemispheric. I believe they estimate it's about maybe 200 by 500 mile landmass. And so if there are millions of people here, and if it was a small geographical radius the Nephites and Lamanites were inhabiting upon, then that changes the equation or the argument about, does DNA disprove the Book of Mormon? Because would we realistically see a trace of their DNA if it was a small geographical landmass and there are millions of people here? Would we see any trace of Israelite DNA and that's it, assuming that we know what Lehite's DNA would look like?
So you're making the assumption that when they were led here to the Americas, that they were given a pristine piece of land that was never inhabited by anybody else. Okay, like there was a piece of land that was completely empty. There was 200 miles by 500 miles and was all empty. And everybody else that lived here, those millions of people, went everywhere in America, but purposely left a nice piece of land empty for the Nephites when they would come. That's what you're making as an assumption.
Well, no, I'm not assuming that, but I'm saying that the
That's what
scholars say that that's sort of the rough sort of geographical landmass for where most of the cities and where they
I
were traveling.
understand
I
that,
assume there could have been migrations northwards, and that there could have been other peoples there as well.
maybe I didn't explain myself very good. So listen to me again. So Nephi and Lehi and their sheep must have landed somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that was a small group of people, and they probably lived together for a while. And that's what the Book of Mormon say, right? They had the disagreement. I don't know how much inland they went, but what I'm assuming is that if they got somewhere in the Americas, sooner or later, in the first days probably of them being there, they run into somebody. Okay. These are people that know how to build. They know where the resources are. They know what food are good to eat. They know how to hunt. They know what beasts are good to eat. I mean, that would be local people that would allow for a quick assimilation and teaching of local ways of surviving. All right. I don't believe that they would have arrived and there was a preserved piece of land that no one else lived, and they said, "This is yours,"
This
and
is
build
Nephite
a.
land.
Eh? It's not
I would say
what?
this is Nephite land. No one else can be here.
Exactly, and no one else has been here for thousands of years. All right, it's been preserved just for you. No, I think that they made their way, finding a place that was suitable for living to establish their own home. You know, not a civilization, just their own home. What do you do when you arrive to a place? You need shelter, you need food. How long can you go without any of that? I mean, look at the people that came to America, the first pilgrim. Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving in America? What is Thanksgiving in America? Are Europeans that came here and had no food and they were about to die, and Native Americans offered them local food so that they could survive that winter. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a national holiday. You know, these are, if the Book of Mormon story is true, these are people that are arriving to a land that they don't know anything about it, and they have nothing to survive. They will be dead, within hours of their arrival, okay? Unless they find a way to get food and to get shelter. Now,
So you're saying
I
they would have been reliant upon and intermingled with already indigenous population peoples that were there.
would it make more sense that the Lord can change and soften the heart of people so that they will be welcoming to them rather than they have to start everything from scratch of having to fight over, to get some, to establish themselves? I mean, what happened when the Israelites left Egypt and they were commanded to go to the promised land? Who lived in the promised land? Was
Canaanites.
Canaanites, right? Canaanites, what did the Lord command them? The Israelites were a lot of people. There were thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, right? So they commanded them, get rid of them, kill them, right? Kill them and take over the land, right? Now here we have 30 people, 50 people, including children. I don't think that would have been a good suggestion, right? Go there and kill everybody and take over the Americas. What about mingle with them, teach them about the truth, learn from them, and establish yourself as a civilization? And then, do we really have millions of people? That's another issue, or it seems millions to them. Is the concept of millions the same as we read in the scripture as we think today? We come from you and I come from what it is neoclassicism, which is Greek culture. That's what we study. When we read the word when I say to you, look, Stephen, I'm going to give you 1 million, what do you have, pounds, euros? What
Pounds.
do you have?
Pounds,
Pounds?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to give you 1 million pounds. And I bring a suitcase to you, and inside the suitcase, there is 150,000 pounds. You're going to look at me as like, you told me you're going to give me 1 million, but there is 150,000 in here. Why? Because you're thinking like a Greek person where every number is exactly what it says. 1 million is 1 million, and it's different than 150,000. Somebody from the Middle East doesn't think that way, because to them, 150,000 is a lot of money, and it's like a million to them. Wow, feels like having $1 million, right? But it's not, right? And so we have that in the scriptures. The Bible is full of this, where numbers do not represent actual numbers. They are approximate figures. Middle East culture is where the message or the moral or the teaching is more important than the actual elements that you use to teach them, right? So there are plenty of non-Latter-day Saints books that talk about that, interpretation of ancient texts or scriptures or culture.
Like quite often they might exaggerate, the numbers in a battle, or is it like the Nephite battle at the end where it talks about like, Moroni or Mormon and his 10,000 is like 10, exactly 10,000 in each troop, and it's like, would that have been the precise number?
Yeah, but they're not exaggerating. It's their perception, it's the way they're feeling, it's the way that they're telling the story, it's just like 7 days to create the world, or 40 days of fasting in the desert for Jesus. I mean, all these numbers are not to be read as numbers. They have to be read as some in the context of what it is that we are teaching. What are we learning from the creation? What are we learning from Jesus' extensive fasting? We just focus on the number. Were there, was Moses really 40 days up in the Mount Sinai to communicate with the Lord, or was just a long time? It felt like he was gone for a long time, Sometimes my wife goes for a week to visit her parents, and I feel like it's a month or a year, and I tell her, like, wow, it felt like you were gone forever. We say that, right? Don't we ever see that?
Sure.
So we have to be very careful. So were there really millions of Nephite? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. How big was the geographic area they live? Well, probably was limited. How big was that? I don't know. But look at Israel, 60 miles for 120 miles or 150 miles. And yet we have the whole Bible taking place right there, in the little land, with very few mention of other people coming in from time to time to invade them. But we have no story of whatsoever what's going on in the rest of the world, because it's an ethnocentric story written by those people for those people. And that's what the Book of Mormon is. The Book of Mormon is a story of the Nephites, written by the Nephites for the Nephites at first, and then with the purpose of going to other people in the future. But the story that they're telling is a story of a limited area and a limited group of people that probably most likely intermingle with local population very early, very early. How do I know that? I don't know, but it seems logical to me, and how do other people know differently? Well, they're also making things, assumptions that are logical to them, or they want it to be logical to them. But
so
again,
a lot of it comes down to our assumptions and how we read and interpret the Book of Mormon. And what I think I hear you saying is that if they came to a limited, geography land mass, and they intermingled with millions of people that were already here, that it makes sense that we wouldn't see a trace of their DNA.
They don't need to mingle with millions of people. They need to mingle with with their local people. If there are 1,000 of them, or 2,000 or 5,000 of them, and you are 30 people coming, that's what's going to happen. Your genetic is not going to make an impact.
Yeah.
And the only way it's going to make an impact is if you kept for yourself for a very long time, and you grow really big, and then eventually you start making that. But you're not considering a lot of it. Even with that very unlikely scenario, you're not considering the major distraction, considering that are explained in the Book of Mormon. The distraction preceding the second coming, the big wars at the end of the Book of Mormon. All right, if they have to be taken literal, that would have changed the demographics of the people in the land. The fact that there were no more Lamanites or Nephites, and then there are again Lamanites and Nephites, the fact that the Europeans came and wiped out entire populations here in a non-random way and in a very drastic way. You know, there are so many factors that would have played. On one hand, we have a very limited story that does not focus on those elements that we are trying to demonstrate, like genetics and population interactions and a mixture. It doesn't talk about that, okay? It is somewhat missing. It doesn't mean that it's never happened. It's just not fully and detailed described. On the other hand, we have major, drastic, catastrophic events that are described in the Book of Mormon and in the histories of the America that would have played a tremendous role on the genetics and demographics of the people. And we take into those two very incomplete and drastic set of sources of information, and we're saying, wow, DNA is proving the Book of Mormon not to be true. And I'm looking at these people and I'm like, that is it? That is the best that you can do, is to draw this conclusion. I mean, you're dismissing everything else that this book is offering you, okay? Even from a literary point of view. I mean, think about it, the consistency, think of the text. You know, if Joseph Smith wanted to fool people with a fake record, why in the world that didn't need to build such a complex history that is over 500 pages long, that goes over a period of 1,000 years? Why didn't he write that just a brochure that is 20 pages long, saying an angel appeared to me and told me to start a new church, and either you believe this or not, pray about it, and if you feel good about it, follow me? Why didn't he just do that? Why didn't he have to create that thing, that beast?
Yeah, it's complex work. All, you know, the different civilizations, chronology, the complex internal consistent geography.
It's all consistent. There is a tremendous amount of consistency that a farm boy would have to, and then people's like, oh, but he had access to this literature, or we think that Joseph Smith was ignorant, but he wasn't. But again, you guys are not. It doesn't work for me. Okay, personally, it doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is so much more in that book to justify. You know, like I couldn't write the book, and I have a PhD. You know, and I written articles, and it's hard to write even with modern technology and Google available to you. You know,
You can orally dictate it with your face in a hat without a manuscript or notes.
You know, and I'm like, oh, okay, he got a hat, then the Book of Mormon must not be true, or he got a stone. You know, I got a stone here, and I'm trying to read stuff through it, and I can't. You know, here it is. You got my stone right there, right? Okay, I put that in a hat, and I cannot write my scientific articles with it. So I must be really bad as a scientist because I cannot look at my stone. But here you have a farm boy that produces that record in such a short amount of time, and an incredible history and teachings. And you know, anyway, I think you know, I appreciate a different interpretation, and I understand why people have different reasons to believe or not believe. You know, I was, you know, I was working for the church full time for a period of time, and people say, well, of course you're supporting the church because, you know, you're working for them, right? And now I'm not working for them.
So like motivated reasoning, you know, confirmation bias would come in.
And I think we all have those, you know, and again, at the end, the Book of Mormon has to be taken for what it says it is. Does it right? You know, do you read it? Do you study? Do you ask God? Do you pray? Do you ponder? Do you, does it bring you closer to Christ? You know, that's what the Book of Mormon claims are. Does it tell you that, does it claim to be the records of all the Native Americans of the America? Does it tell you to be an historical book? Does it tell you to be a genetic treatise of a population history? Does it? No, you know, just take the book for what it says and see if it's consistent with what his claims are.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you one or two last just questions related to DNA? And we've maybe already touched on this a little bit because, you know, we talked about how Lamanite isn't a blood designation in the Book of Mormon. but those who aren't with the Nephites are given the designation Lamanite. So it allows room that they could have been intermingling with other people that didn't descend from Lehi. But critics will often say, I hear this criticism a lot of like, the Book of Mormon is there to convert both Jew and Gentile, but the Lamanite, that's one of the primary purposes. Then they'll say like, well, we don't know by looking at DNA like who are the Lamanites, and Joe Smith received some early revelations to preach the gospel to the Lamanites like in Missouri, and then they would say like, well, who are the Lamanites then? Do you have any thoughts on that? What would be your answer to that?
So again, this is a very personal approach and comes from my interpretation of the Book of Mormon. But I would think that Lamanites, as used by Joseph Smith and consistent with the end of the Book of Mormon, is anyone that doesn't know about Christ or does not believe in Christ. So these were referred to as Lamanites as Native Americans that did not have a knowledge of Christ. That's what my thing is. And the moment that you accept, in fact, it bothers me when sometimes even church leaders might have referred to us natives of South America as the Lamanites, right? Because if they have Latter-day Saints and they have and they are baptized and they embrace the gospel, that should not be Lamanites according to the definition of Lamanites. So it's like to keep using the word Lamanite, particularly with those people that enter the covenant, is like calling them unbelievers. That's the definition you have in the Book of Mormon. It is not an ethnic definition, it's a belief definition.
Right. I think that's something that we've misunderstood, because the Book of Mormon does talk about, especially, after, third Nephi, and that there's no manner of ites and they're all united, but then there's Nephites and Lamanites again.
And so, and they're very clear about who is going to be called a Nephite and who's going to be called a Lamanite. And that's the last instructions the Book of Mormon gave us about the issue, that matter. That is the most recent and the most update instruction, regardless of whatever happened in the Book of Mormon prior to that. The very last time that we hear about this distinction between Lamanites and Nephites is all about a matter of belief.
Yeah,
and we should be consistent with that.
I want to get your take on. I got this from Book of Mormon Central about like who are the Lamanites. Do you mind if I read this little paragraph to you? Because they're claiming, so they say some Latter-day Saints may be interested to know that despite the absence of his genetic signature, it remains likely that Lehi and his sons living in the Americas 2,600 years ago are common ancestors of all Native Americans, according to basic statistical calculation and world population estimates. After going back 2,000 to 3,000 years, nearly everyone living then is a common ancestor for nearly everyone living now. Would you agree with that statement in there?
I provide the statements to them.
Do you agree with yourself then?
Yes, because see, this is a genealogical approach. It's not even a genetic approach. It's like, are you a spiritual descendant of Abraham or a physical descendant of Abraham? Well, biologically you cannot prove that, but the reality is, yes, you are genealogically, because of the population growth in time. If an individual had children back 3,000 years ago, and those children have children every generation since then you have that person as an ancestor, and most likely every person alive today have that person as an ancestor. You probably heard, sometimes genealogy says, oh, I've been able to trace my genealogy back to Charlemagne, right? The famous European king, Charlemagne, right? I don't know why they choose him over all the other kings. There've been so many other kings. Why him? But anyway, the reality is, it's like, well, you might have been able to reconstruct a genealogical record that you go back to that individual. I don't have that, but guess what? If he had descendants today, I would be a descendant of him as well. Everybody would be. Okay, it's just a statistical determination that everybody will be somebody's descendant if there is enough time between you and that person, you know. But
Okay, got you.
genetically, you cannot demonstrate that because it took, and I use this example often, but again, it's another one of those that people don't like to hear, but it took 1,024 people 10 generations ago for me to exist today, okay? 10,024 people means 512 couples, okay? 512 sets of men and women, okay? Getting together and having a child. 512 couples, 1,024 people, 10 generations ago, all right? Then they had a child, they had children, they had children, they had children, they married, they had children, all the way to me. So it took 1,000 people 10 generations ago for me to be here. And yet, only about 100 of those 1,000 people, I have their genes. I am alive biologically and genetically. You know, I need to have DNA in order for me to be alive. I cannot be alive without DNA. DNA produces all the proteins that are part of my physiology and my anatomy. Okay, my structure and my functions are all determined on DNA instructions. So I need to have DNA. It's essential to life. Where does the DNA come from? It comes from about 1/10 or 100 of those 1,000 people. So genetically, 900 of them may as well never existed for me to function today. And yet, I wouldn't be alive if they didn't exist because I needed them to have offspring that they would come to me. So there is some sort of a biological discrepancy, but it is how it works, where I don't need the DNA of all my ancestors to exist, and yet I need all of them to be here today.
Right.
Sense?
DNA doesn't always credit or recognize all of the ancestors you've had.
Yeah, so if I look at my DNA as a evidence for these people to exist, 900 of them, they don't exist.
Right, yeah.
And yet historically and genealogically, they must have existed for me to be here today. Okay?
But
so
your DNA wouldn't show it.
The DNA would not show it. The same thing is with Lehite. If Lehite had children, and their children had children, and those children and children with other populations in the Americas, and at the end, even if that Lehite or Israelite DNA doesn't exist, everybody will still genealogically be related to him.
Okay. And one last question, because there's some people, so I think you would go more the route is, you know, DNA does not disprove the Book of Mormon, but there's some people who advocate that DNA supports the Book of Mormon, particularly those people who, you know, believe in like the Heartland model and, you know, DNA evidence in the Great Lakes region, and they would point to Haplo Group X. I remember watching a video years and years ago by, I think it was Rod Meldrum, sort of promoting it, and this supports the Book of Mormon. What is your thoughts on those people who are promoting that DNA evidence? Is it reliable? Does it date to the Lehite's time?
So number one, this again there is one thing that is evidence, and another thing is interpretation of evidence. Okay. Now, I don't have any problem with anybody believing any geographical model that is being proposed, that is out there, or even new ones that will be proposed in the future, if any. Okay, anybody can believe whatever they want about the model. What I like is that the Book of Mormon geography is consistent enough to create several models. You can create an internal map and overlap that map in many different places in the Americas and make it work somehow, all right? So I love the fact that there are multiple options. If it's better to have multiple options for a model than to not have any models at all or more no option at all. And that's like, okay, I got this internal map, but gosh, it doesn't fit anywhere. That would be a little bit harder. I mean, there could have been geographic changes over time, you know, the distractions before the second coming, before the coming of Jesus in America, you know, there could be many different things that could have caused a change in the geography. But I would have a harder time with no models at all than having multiple models. All right. When critics of the church says, look how funny it is, you know, even scholars in the church do not agree on where the Book of Mormon took place. And they look at that as evidence that the Book of Mormon is not true because there is that disagreement of multiple models. I look at that as like, wow, cool. There are multiple
options,
you know. You know, this is great, you know. So I don't have a problem with what people believe. It's how we teach and impose that model. It's the fact that you are so set on one model that you want to be right, and you go to the extent sometimes of implying that if you do not believe in that model or you don't fully embrace in that model, then you're missing out something in your personal journey in the restoration. You know, that is what I perceive when I hear. It's not what they teach, it's how they teach it. Okay? It's what is your ultimate goal for people, that you want people to believe your model. You know, what is that you're trying to get out of that? Why is it important for you? Is it because people gave you money for it? Is it because then people have something better than faith to trust in the Book of Mormon? You know, faith is not good enough. Confirmation from the Spirit is not good enough. You need to have tangible proof that the Book of Mormon really happens somewhere, and that makes you feel like more people will stay strong in the church or embrace the Book of Mormon as a true record because you're providing some man-made conclusions and evidence. You know, is that what is your purpose of it, is, and how are you teaching that? That's what I have a hard time. So going back to that model, you say haplogroup X as evidence. Haplogroup X is not evidence of the Book of Mormon to be true. Okay, it is a very questionable and limited type of genetic data that we have. And it's a weak link to people of the past. Haplogroup X is an haplogroup that is found in multiple places around the world. It is found in Israel, it is found in Asia, it is found in the America. They have all some common characteristics, which makes them all be called haplogroup X. That's, you know, they would not be all haplogroup X if they would not share some common mutations, some common characteristics. On the other hand, they are different enough that we can build a tree and place them in relationship with each other. And the one found in America is not a descendant of the one found in the Middle East. Okay, is a sister group. It is not an ancestral or a descendant group. It's not one came before the other, okay? Which means that we still don't know how haplogroup X arrived to the America, and we still don't know if that was brought from the people described in the Book of Mormon. We have no evidence about that. The only way we could do that is if we find the body or the skeletal remains of Lehi or Nephi or Sariah, whoever is that was at his original group, and in this case would be the woman because it's a mitochondrial DNA group that would have been passed to the modern time only from the female lines, and test those ancient people and see what DNA they had, and then we would know for sure that the people that would carry that today would be descended from that. But we don't know that, and it is not connected to that. In fact, the oldest haplogroup X found in America is being found right on the border between the state of Washington and the state of Oregon. okay, on the Pacific area right there, which is close to Siberia, to Alaska. Sorry, to let me rephrase that. It is close to the Beringian entry, the Bering Strait entry to the Americas. So it will be consistent with coming from Asia together with all the other lineages and then going into the Great Lakes. It's more consistent from that point of view, using science today, okay? And science does not have all the answers, but it seems very much based on modern data, the haplogroup X came from Asia through the Bering Strait, like all the other haplogroups.
Okay. So you would discourage people trying to use that to support, this is Israelite DNA to support, Lehi and the Book of Mormon.
Is a weak evidence, you need to dismiss a lot of other things for that to be considered evidence. And at the end of the day, it might be, and if it is, it was a lucky guess, but right now, as what we have as evidence, it is very weak evidence for such a connection.
Okay, gotcha. And just one final question, wrapping up, that there might be some people who might feel like, okay, this is sort of helped to see that there's more complexity, to DNA, population genetics, understanding like a limited geography, and that there are other people here, and being like an ethnocentric record, that like a lineage history. But what would you say, and this is more people a bit more critical who would say, because I get this, a bit on my channel, I did a video on DNA, and some people just feel like this is sort of, shifting the goalposts, making it smaller, putting the Book of Mormon into this realm of, disprovable, and they would point to some statements from past prophets or leaders that have, very explicitly claimed, maybe a hemispheric geography, or that the Native Americans are the principal descendants of Lamanites, and now we're just having to retract from that, and apologists are trying to, defend it and make it smaller, the Book of Mormon. What would you say to those people?
I think, to be fair, is that at the end, everybody's playing the same game. We're all interpreting things in a way that makes sense to us, or that support what we want for people to believe to be true. So critics of the church are using exactly the same instruments and the same resources and the same approach that apologists are following, okay, or Artlanders are following, or whatever that is, because at the end, we all have our favorite quotes of prophets and apostles, and we dismiss others, and we have our favorite interpretations of the scriptures, and we have our favorite verses that we use to support and demonstrate our cause, whether it is in favor or against the faith, or against the Book of Mormon. And so what I'm saying is that, everybody, again, is entitled to their own opinion. But ultimately, what it boils down to, I think, is number one, to be a true Christian is somebody that teaches to avoid contention and to get along with each other. And
that's what Jesus taught to the Nephites.
Yeah, that's the best, the first things. And number two, and I know this is hard, but I'm looking at the church as a member of the church, and I feel like I am the church, right? And ultimately, what the gospel is and how true it is reflected in what the people do with their lives and how it changes their life. And in my mind, when people do the things that Christ told us to do, as we read them in the scripture, and as in my personal experience, we use a lot nowadays, well, I identify myself as, it doesn't matter what I am, but I identify myself as something else. Well, I identify myself as a Christian Latter-day Saints. I am very comfortable with the teachings and the doctrines of the church, and I can see them bringing a positive change in the life of people that humbly and trying to do their best in following them. It is the only way back to God. I think the God mercy and Christ's grace is a lot bigger than what we tend to accept and believe and understand. But at the end of the day, there might be multiple ways to be a good Christian, and fighting against each other and criticizing one way or another, or pointing out things what the church could do better at this, or the church should not be doing that, or Joseph Smith should have not done that. That doesn't bring any peace, doesn't bring any growth. Let's focus on the good. Let's focus on the positive. With the Book of Mormon, let's focus on what the teachings of the Book of Mormon are and what impact they have on your life and how closely they bring you to Christ. And if that works, then stick to it. And if it doesn't work for you, then let other people do that. Don't need to, but find a way for you to be closer to Christ, no matter where you're going. I feel like there is a lot of energy and resources in a lot of people's minds to, I feel like Don Quixote, like fighting against the windmills, you see dragons when there are no dragons there. I think that the real dragons are found inside ourselves, that we can be the dragon, and we need to be more Christ-like. And unfortunately, if you're not a follower of Christ, you leave yourself open to be a follower of a lot of other things. And that's kind of like my point. And I have a lot to learn. I'm not definitely a good Christian. I need to be better at everything I do, even my reading of the Book of Mormon. But I can honestly tell you that the DNA is a great instrument to be used in science, particularly in solving crimes, in paternity cases, even in providing some information about our distant past. However, when we use DNA to answer questions that could not be answered through DNA, it becomes really frustrating and misleading. We need to be able to design a study that could be addressed by DNA. And so far, all that we have done is making claims that have not supported by actual studies or actual experiments. And that's why we should be careful in using DNA as some sort and claiming that DNA is an evidence against or in favor of the Book of Mormon. I don't think that DNA is the instrument that was designed for that to answer that particular question.
Kind of like it's scientifically untestable in this regard to Lehite DNA.
Yeah, again, you could be fighting against windmills.
Okay. Well, Dr. Ugo Perrego, I've really enjoyed this time with you, and for our discussion and interview to dive a little bit deeper, into DNA and the Book of Mormon, for your insights and your views, and for the time you've given to me to have this discussion. I hope it's been beneficial to those who are listening. Is there any last words you want to give, or any resources you would point to people who maybe want to explore this issue a little bit more in depth? Any maybe articles or things which you've done, or any advice to people who maybe just have maybe genuine just some struggles? Maybe they're struggling with some things, not just maybe with DNA, but other issues with the Book of Mormon.
Well, I found it really enjoyable studying the Book of Mormon with using some of the more recent scholarly work. It provides some nice introspects about the text. As again, I mentioned a couple books. One of them is Understanding the Book of Mormon by Grant Hardy.
I've ordered his book. I'm looking forward to reading it.
And it's very nice companion to study the Book of Mormon. And again, the brief theological introduction produced by the Maxwell Institute has a very good insights on that. I also enjoy the take of the Givens, Terrell and Fiona Givens, with the Crucible of Doubt book. They address some really important issues, and I really love Elder Corbridge talk Here We Stand that you mentioned earlier.
Stand Forever.
Stand Forever, with the marginal questions, or the principal question and the secondary questions, the principal and the marginal. And those are all great places to kind of build a little bit of a foundation. I would seriously ask myself that question before I would take anybody else comments, and word for about whether science proves or disproves the Book of Mormon. I would ask the question: have I honestly and sincerely put the effort in studying and reading and pondering the content of that book, and seeing its impact on my life before jumping at any conclusions? And if I want the book to not be true because I want to live a different lifestyle, that's a different matter. But I want to, I think the hardest things people have to live with today is about being honest with themselves. And sometimes we like to believe things to be in a certain ways, and like the Book of Mormon say, we tell the story so many times that at the end we start believing it ourselves. And I think that we can see that as well with the Book of Mormon, when we try to support it or be against it using scientific evidence. I think that we have told ourselves the story so many times that we forgot the reason, or the true reason, and we're not honest with ourselves about why we got there, that we need to use the evidence. So I don't think it's the evidence, I think is ourself.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, I've really enjoyed this interview with you, this discussion. Listeners, thank you so much for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'll have future content coming your way. I'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.
All right.
Thanks, Ugo. Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.